October 1973. A steelworker named Mike Lefevre sits across from an interviewer. The tape recorder is running. His hands are thick. He is 37 years old. He has been lifting steel since he was 19. The interviewer is Studs Terkel. The book will be called Working. It will sell 1 million copies. Mike says something that lands. He says you cannot take pride anymore. You used to be able to point to a house you built, a bridge. Somebody built the pyramids. Now you work, and nothing has your name on it. Then he says the line that tells you everything. He says it is not that the average working guy is dumb. He says he is tired. That is October 1973. That same month, 4,000 miles away, the oil ministers of Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, Libya, and Algeria met in Kuwait City. On October 17th, they announced a production cut and an embargo against the United States. By January, the price of a barrel of Arabian oil goes from under $3 to over $11. Gasoline doubles. Heating oil nearly doubles in one New England winter. Mike Lefevre, the steelworker in Cicero who is already tired, is about to become the template for every paycheck-to-paycheck American alive today. But to understand why, you have to understand what he had that you don't. Before we dive in, start with a number. 37%. That is the share of American adults who cannot cover a $400 emergency with cash. 13% cannot pay it at all. The Federal Reserve released that survey in May of last year. The number has been roughly this bad for a decade. Now hold that number in your head. Here is the question nobody in Washington wants to answer. How did the country that put a man on the moon in 1969 end up with a household that cannot absorb a broken transmission in 2026? The official story says Americans got reckless. History tells a completely different story. What actually happened is that every shock absorber the 1973 household had was removed, one at a time, over 50 years, not by accident. Let me show you the absorbers. Absorber 1A union wage with a cost of living clause. In 1948, Walter Reuther of the United Auto Workers negotiated a contract with General Motors that included something called a cost of living allowance every 3 months, the wage adjusted to inflation. If prices went up, the paycheck went up. By 1980, roughly 60% of workers under major union contracts had that clause built in. The letter carriers had one. The Teamsters had one. The auto workers had one. The steel workers had one. Today, fewer than 10% of private sector workers are in a union at all. Absorber gone. But that was just the first thing they took. Absorber 2, a fixed-rate mortgage on a house that kept up with inflation. A family that took out a $30,000 mortgage in 1972 at 7% fixed paid the same payment every month through 1982. But the dollars they were paying with had lost more than half their purchasing power. Meanwhile, in the Sun Belt Phoenix, Houston, Atlanta, Southern California, the house doubled or tripled in value. The family paid back cheap dollars on an appreciating asset. That is the single largest inflation windfall an ordinary American household has ever received. Today, the median new home price in America is over $400,000. The price-to-income ratio hit 5.6 in 2022, the highest since record-keeping began. The 30-year fixed mortgage is still available, but the house is no longer affordable to the family that would use it. Absorber out of reach. The third one might hurt the most. Absorber 3. A pension the employer was legally required to fund. In 1975, 27 million American workers were in defined benefit pension plans. The employer promised a paycheck for life. The employer had to put real money aside. If the employer failed, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation backstopped it. In 2023, the number of private sector workers in defined benefit plans was 11 million. In their place, 96 million people in 401k accounts. The median 401k balance for Americans age 55 to 64 is $87,000. Americans say they need $1.46 million to retire. The risk of old age was transferred from the employer's balance sheet to your kitchen table. Absorber gone. 2 more to go. They get worse. Absorber 4. A manufacturing job that paid a premium over the rest of the economy. In June of 1979, American manufacturing employed 19.5 million people, about 22% of all non-farm jobs. In 1973, the hourly wage in construction alone was 28% higher than the all-industry average. Those jobs were in Youngstown, Ohio, Flint, Michigan, Gary, Indiana, Lackawanna, New York, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Today, manufacturing has about 12.5 million jobs, roughly 8% of non-farm employment, 6.5 million jobs gone. The towns still exist. The mills do not. Absorber gone. The last one was never really there to begin with. Absorber 5. A savings account that at least kept up with inflation. From the 1930s through 1986, there was a rule called Regulation Q. It capped the interest a bank could pay on a regular passbook savings account. In 1980, that cap was 5.25%. Inflation that year was 13.5%. A Wall Street research paper calculated that in the spring of 1979, the real interest rate on ordinary deposits hit negative 5.8%. Every $100 in a passbook account lost almost $6 of purchasing power in a year. The New Republic called it the Great Savings Swindle. People eventually figured out they could put their money in money market funds instead. Those exploded from $4 billion in 1977 to $230 billion by 1982. Regulation Q was phased out by 1986. But today, the average American savings account pays less than 0.5%, while inflation runs 3%. Absorber was never really there. The 1973 household had all 5 absorbers. The 2026 household has, on average, none of them. That is why a $400 car repair ends a family. But here is the part the financial press never tells you. Some people actually survived. Some people came through 1973 to 1982 with their wealth and their households intact. They did not do it with savings accounts. They did not do it with long-dated treasury bonds. They did not do it with whole life insurance, and most of them did not do it with gold. They did it with 4 specific things. The first was a trade: a plumber, an electrician, a welder, a diesel mechanic, a framer. Here is what the data actually shows about skilled tradesmen between 1973 and 1982. Their wages were already 28% above the all-industry average when the embargo hit. If they were union, they had a cost of living clause. If they were not union, they had something just as valuable. They had a skill that people would pay cash for on a Saturday. An economist named Peter Gutmann published a paper in 1977 estimating the size of the unreported American economy at about 10% of the measured economy. $176 billion at the time. Most of it was people who worked on each other's houses and cars and barns for cash. That cash was not reported. It was not taxed. It was not indexed to anything. But it tracked inflation instantly because the plumber charged what materials cost plus his time. When materials went up, the bill went up. A trade is a portable, unreportable, automatically indexed income stream. There is a reason the tradesmen Turkle interviewed in 1973 sound less anxious than the white-collar workers he interviewed in the same book. They had something no bank could devalue. Today, the United States is short an estimated 500,000 skilled tradesmen, electricians, plumbers, HVAC technicians, welders, diesel mechanics, crane operators, linemen. A 19-year-old who starts an apprenticeship this year earns more in his 30s than most college graduates, without the debt. That is not opinion. That is the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics this quarter. The second thing that worked was a fixed-rate mortgage taken out before the inflation. The family that bought a house in 1968 at 6% and stayed put through the 1970s paid the mortgage in cheaper and cheaper dollars every year. By 1982, cumulative inflation had cut the real value of the original loan balance roughly in half. A $30,000 loan in 1972 was a $13,000 loan in 1982 dollars. Same nominal balance, half the real weight. If the house was in the Sun Belt, the value had doubled on top of that. The mechanism only works in inflation. It does not work if you cannot afford the payment through a job loss. But when it works, it is the closest thing to a free lunch the American financial system has ever handed a working-class family. The third thing that worked was a farm owned free and clear. Not a farm that had been leveraged up to buy the next 100 acres in 1978. Those farms went bankrupt in the 1985 farm crisis. 300,000 farmers defaulted nationally. Iowa farmland lost 61% of its real value between 1981 and 1987. The farms that survived were the ones owned by the old man who had paid off the note in 1966 and refused to borrow against the land anymore. He produced his own food. He grew crops that tracked commodity prices. He owed nothing. He slept. The fourth thing that worked was physical precious metal bought early and held with discipline. Gold was legal for Americans to own again on December 31, 1974. By January 21, 1980, it had gone from $35 an ounce to $850. Silver went from around $6 in January of 1979 to $49 by the Hunt Brothers corner in January of 1980. Those are the headline gains, but almost nobody captured them. Most retail buyers did not sell at the top. They rode the metals down through a 20-year bear market that did not bottom until the early 2000s. The people who made money on 1970s gold and silver were the ones who bought early, sized small, and had either the luck or the discipline to sell into the peak. The mechanism is real, but the discipline is rarer than the mechanism. 3 of those 4 survivor strategies are effectively out of reach today. The pre-inflation mortgage requires a time machine. The debt-free farm requires land that now costs more per acre than most Americans earn in a decade. The disciplined metal position requires a peak nobody sees coming and a seller who knows when to walk away. Only one of the 4 is still available to the 26-year-old carpenter watching this. The trade. That is not an accident. It is the last shock absorber the system forgot to take away. Now let me tell you who did not come through, because the graveyard is where the real lesson lives. The Franklin National Bank on Long Island collapsed in October of 1974. An Italian financier named Michele Sindona had drained tens of millions out of it, covering foreign exchange losses. It was the largest bank failure in American history at the time. The depositors were rescued by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. But 5 of the 10 largest bank failures in American history up to that point happened between 1973 and 1976. The savers who bought certificates of deposit at passbook rates during those years watched inflation eat them alive. The government saved the banks. It did not save the purchasing power of the people who played by the rules. Then came the gold scams. In 1979, 2 brothers in Fort Lauderdale named William and James Alderdice opened a company called the International Gold Bullion Exchange. They promised deep discounts on gold delivered in 3 to 4 months. They collected somewhere between $140 and $200 million from 23,000 customers. They never actually bought the gold. They used each new customer's money to cover the previous customer's delivery. A classic Ponzi scheme. When the gold price turned up in late 1982, the company collapsed. The bankruptcy was announced in March of 1983. William Alderdice was stabbed to death in his jail cell in 1984. His brother got 10 years. 23,000 families who were trying to escape inflation lost everything they had set aside. That same year, a similar scheme called Bullion Reserve of North America collapsed in Los Angeles. Another $60 million in customer losses. These were not greedy speculators. These were working and middle-class Americans in their 50s and 60s who had seen what inflation was doing and were trying to protect their families. They reached for a lifeline, and the lifeline snapped. Then came the Rust Belt. On September 19, 1977, the parent company of Youngstown Sheet and Tube met at the Pittsburgh airport on a Sunday. They announced the closure of the Campbell Works the next morning. 5,000 workers laid off in one day. The town called it Black Monday. Over the next 5 years, Youngstown lost roughly 50,000 jobs. On June 25, 1982, Bethlehem Steel announced that its Lackawanna, New York plant would shut down in 6 weeks. 10,000 direct layoffs, another 8,000 jobs in the surrounding Buffalo economy. On December 31, 1983, Kaiser Steel shut its Fontana, California mill at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. 8,800 workers walked out that day. Their homes did not appreciate it. Their pensions where they had them were cut. Their savings in passbook accounts lose purchasing power every year. And their skills where they had them were tied to an industry that was leaving the country. The tradesmen among them moved. The production workers mostly did not. That is the gap. And here is the part that almost never gets told. The 1973 household was not saved by the government. Not by Nixon's price controls. Not by Ford's whip inflation. Now buttons which even Alan Greenspan later described as unbelievably stupid. Not by Carter's crisis of confidence speech. Not by the Federal Energy Office handing out rationing coupons. The households that came through because they had something the system did not give them and could not take away. A skill, a piece of paid-off land, a mortgage locked in before the storm, a handful of coins in a safe that no regulation could cap. The government saved the banks. The families saved themselves. Here is the closing insight. For 50 years, every time the American household has lost an absorber, it has been sold back to the same household as a product. The union contract disappeared. In its place came the side hustle. The employer pension disappeared. In its place came the 401k and the fee-charging advisor. The pre-inflation mortgage disappeared. In its place came the cash-out refinance, the home equity line, and now the 36-month auto loan stretched to 84 months. The manufacturing job disappeared. In its place came the gig app that takes 30% of the fare. The inflation savings account disappeared. In its place came the annuity, the whole life policy, and the crypto exchange. Every substitute the system offered was a product with a fee attached, sold back to the family the system had just stripped. The $400 American is not reckless. She is a customer. Mike Lefebvre understood this in 1973, sitting in his kitchen in Cicero. He said the average working guy is not dumb. He is just tired of paying rent on things he used to own. The households that came through 1973 to 1982 were the ones who stopped being customers. They built their own shock absorbers, mostly with their own hands. The question no one is asking is what happens when the last absorber finally breaks. The households that survived 1973 did one thing the 2026 household cannot seem to do. They stopped being customers. But there is one strategy they used that nobody talks about, one that has nothing to do with trades or mortgages or gold, one that does not require a time machine or a $500,000 piece of land.
It is the oldest strategy in American history, and it is the only one that still works when every other absorber has been stripped away.